Black CEO, Undercover visits his own bank to withdraw money, shocked when denied. A biting wind swept through downtown Chicago as Marcus Hamilton, a distinguished yet unassuming figure, approached the gleaming doors of Majesty Bank. Beneath his tailored trench coat, he clutched a worn leather wallet containing a modest check he planned to cash in person just to see how ordinary patrons were treated. Tall, with a quiet confidence and kind eyes, Marcus intended to blend in, curious whether his staff truly upheld the bank's long-standing values of fairness and respect. Little did he know, a shocking encounter awaited him at the teller's window, setting off a chain of events that would transform both him and the bank forever. Marcus Hamilton was no stranger to humble beginnings. He'd grown up on the south side of Chicago, where boarded-up buildings and scarce job opportunities weighed heavily on families. Yet, determination coursed through his veins from a young age. After attending a local public high school, he earned a scholarship to Howard University, forging the foundation that would carry him into a world of corporate finance. Years later, he rose to become the CEO of Majesty Bank, a financial institution known throughout the Midwest, and particularly in Chicago, as a pillar of stability and community outreach. Yet, with success came distance. Marcus's days had become consumed by board meetings, video conferences with global investors, and philanthropic commitments, such as his seat on the board of directors at Feeding America. He made keynote speeches at leadership conferences and appeared in Forbes magazine articles spotlighting rising African American executives in corporate America. In short, Marcus had grown away from the day-to-day experiences of his regular customers, people very much like the neighbors he'd once had. Despite his prestige and imposing presence, tall, broad-shouldered, and usually clad in immaculate suits, he could slip into near anonymity when he chose. A simple hoodie and jeans could erase the immediate aura of CEO, letting him blend into everyday city life. After hearing whispers about a particular Majesty Bank branch allegedly giving people a hard time, something tugged at his conscience. Could his institution, one that prided itself on lifting communities, really be acting unfairly toward its own clients? So he devised a plan. He would go undercover at the Madison Street branch in downtown Chicago, just 5 miles from where he was raised, to see firsthand how an ordinary customer might be treated. He left his sleek corporate car behind, opting to arrive by public transportation. The crisp winter air stung his cheeks as he stepped off the bus, not far from the gilded doors of the bank. Outside, he took a moment to steady himself. The city's energy pulsed in his veins, reminding him why he had chosen to focus on community banking all those years ago. Glancing at the reflection in the towering glass facade, Marcus noted how unassuming he looked. If anything was amiss inside, he intended to find out quietly. Little did he know, this simple trip would spark a profound reckoning, forcing Marcus to confront prejudice, corruption, and the very soul of Majesty Bank. The Madison Street branch of Majesty Bank was housed in a handsome neoclassical building constructed in the early 1900s, complete with soaring columns, ornate carvings, and an imposing set of mahogany doors. Above the entrance, large letters spelled out Majesty Bank in gleaming bronze. Despite the grandeur, Marcus felt that something about this location had grown cold over the years. The bank's tagline, "Your trusted partner," was carved into the lintel, but rumors suggested that trust might be wearing thin. Stepping inside, Marcus inhaled the mingled scents of furniture polish and stale coffee. He had memorized every detail of the bank's layout from the floor plans, but the actual atmosphere told a different story. There was a certain tension, a hush that extended beyond typical bank decorum. At the receptionist's desk sat a young woman with tired eyes. She barely looked up when he greeted her, offering only a polite nod. Marcus noticed how worn the waiting chairs were, their upholstery fraying at the corners. A large holiday promotion poster featuring cheerful families and bright green lines promising faster service hung near the entrance, though no one seemed particularly cheerful at the moment. A single security guard stood by, looking more bored than vigilant. He took a moment to examine the teller stations. 3 were open, but only 1 was actually staffed. An older teller wearing a vaguely impatient expression. Marcus also spotted a glass-walled office to the side with a half-closed door, labeled Branch Manager Calvin Rogers. Through the narrow gap, he glimpsed a man in a press suit tapping away on a laptop. Every so often, the manager cast an eye across the lobby, as though suspicious of anyone who lingered too long. Marcus approached the single active teller, holding a small check in his hand. He had deliberately chosen a modest amount, just enough to see how they handled a simple withdrawal. Before leaving his penthouse that morning, he'd asked himself whether he should bring additional ID or relevant documentation. Then again, every client should be able to cash a standard check with a valid ID, no matter who they were. Standing in line behind an elderly customer, Marcus overheard the older woman being questioned pointedly about her transaction. The teller's tone was borderline disrespectful. Marcus's stomach twisted, remembering times in his youth when he had been treated with skepticism just for walking into certain stores. The knot in his gut tightened. If this was how a sweet grandmotherly figure was handled, how would they respond to him? Tucking the check deeper into his coat pocket, Marcus steeled himself for whatever came next. When it was finally Marcus's turn at the counter, he stepped up, greeting the teller with a polite smile. Her name tag read Deborah, but the warmth he hoped for was noticeably missing. She barely offered eye contact as she fiddled with her computer screen. "Good morning," he said, softly, sliding the check over. "I'd like to withdraw this amount in cash." Deborah stared at the check, then at Marcus, then back at the check. "Do you have an account with us?" she asked, sounding skeptical. "Yes, I do," Marcus responded. "Here's my account number," he said, pulling out a slip of paper on which he had jotted down the details that morning. Of course, as the CEO, he had multiple accounts, personal, business, and even philanthropic accounts associated with his name. But for this exercise, he used a standard personal checking account. She glanced at the slip, then typed into her computer. Marcus waited, hands resting lightly on the counter. Deborah frowned, tapping at the keyboard with more force. "It's not showing here. Are you sure this is your number?" Marcus felt a slight prickle of annoyance. "I'm certain," he said calmly. "Perhaps check again?" Deborah let out a soft sigh, inputting the details once more. This time, something appeared on her screen that caused her eyebrows to lift slightly. "It says the account is flagged. I need to get approval from the branch manager." A wave of confusion rolled through Marcus. He had never personally requested any unusual constraints on his own checking account. If the system flagged the CEO's personal account, there had to be a glitch or an internal directive he didn't know about. Immediately, he felt the sense of alarm that so many customers likely felt in similar situations. "All right," he replied, maintaining composure. "If that's protocol." Deborah picked up her phone and dialed an internal extension. Within moments, the branch manager, Calvin Rogers, the man in the glass-walled office, stepped out. He was in his late 40s, hair slicked back, wearing a polished but expressionless look. For a moment, he sized Marcus up before speaking. "Sir, we'll need additional verification," Calvin said flatly, not offering a handshake or any pleasantries. "Please come into my office." Marcus nodded, though his heart pounded with a mixture of bewilderment and curiosity. This was certainly not standard procedure for a simple withdrawal. As he followed Calvin to the office, a swirl of questions ran through his mind. Had employees been given instructions that contradicted the bank's official training? And if so, by whom and why? Calvin's office had the veneer of authority, a large wooden desk, neatly stacked files, and an imposing portrait of the bank's founder, a man who had passed away decades ago. Marcus was surprised there wasn't a more contemporary display of the bank's current leadership. After all, his own portrait as CEO adorned the walls of other branches. But here there was no sign of him at all, an odd omission that pricked at his suspicion. "Take a seat," Calvin said curtly, pointing to a leather chair. He closed the door behind them, leaving the rest of the staff to stare through the glass walls, obviously curious. Marcus lowered himself into the seat, carefully. He could feel the tension emanating from Calvin, as though the manager already had an agenda. "What seems to be the issue?" Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice even. Calvin picked up the check, flipping it between his fingers as though it were counterfeit. "We have a protocol for large withdrawals, especially when they involve unusual circumstances." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't call this amount large. It's several thousand, yes, but well within standard transaction limits." "That may be so," Calvin countered, "but your account has a special note on it. Our system indicates a need for extra security measures." Marcus's mind whirled. He knew the bank's internal policy. Certain high-value or high-risk accounts did, indeed, require additional verification. But ironically, his personal checking account was typically not flagged that way. This discrepancy hinted that something else was at play, either an error or a targeted measure. "All right," Marcus said calmly. "What do you need?" "Identification." He pulled out his driver's license, setting it gently on the desk. Calvin barely glanced at it. Instead, the manager leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I'll need secondary identification proof of employment, recent pay stubs, or maybe contact information for your supervisor." "My supervisor?" The question was so absurd that Marcus nearly let out a laugh. "I am the supervisor," he thought. More precisely, he was the top boss of the entire organization. Keeping his composure, Marcus responded, "I'm self-employed." Calvin's lip curled slightly, and an unmistakable flicker of judgment crossed his face. "Self-employed, huh? What kind of work?" "Finance," Marcus replied succinctly. "But I'm not sure what that has to do with verifying my identity. I've provided a valid ID, and I have an account here." Calvin's expression remained impassive. "Well, if you can't provide secondary verification, I'm afraid I can't authorize this withdrawal." A silent moment passed between them. Marcus wondered if this was just a branch manager on a power trip, or if there was an undercurrent of bias, racial or otherwise. The CEO had encountered more subtle forms of discrimination in the corporate world. Now it stared him in the face, in the very institution he was supposed to lead. His pulse thrummed with indignation. He rose slowly, carefully picking up his license. "Then let's see what we can do," he said, his voice steady. "I'd like to speak to someone at the headquarters about this situation." Calvin shrugged. "You can do that, but right now you're not getting a cent from this branch without the proper documentation." Marcus nodded, a burning resolve kindling within him. This was no longer a casual check on operations, this was personal. Exiting the manager's office, Marcus felt every eye in the lobby trained on him. Deborah, the teller, cast him a sideways glance, and the security guard shifted on his feet, as if weighing whether to intervene. Marcus clasped his wallet, took a calming breath, and decided to step outside to collect his thoughts. The winter air slapped him in the face the moment he passed through the revolving doors. He shivered, though not just from the cold. A flush of hurt and frustration coursed through him. The scenario felt all too familiar, echoing the microaggressions and outright discrimination he had faced as a young black man trying to open his first bank account years ago. Yet the cruelty of it all was heightened by one damning fact. He was the CEO. He strolled a few feet away from the entrance, leaning against one of the tall columns. A bus hissed to a stop across the street, disgorging a line of hurried commuters. The rush of the city continued, indifferent to his personal crisis. Marcus inhaled, reminding himself he had the power to change the situation, but how to proceed wisely. He could storm back in, reveal his identity, and fire Calvin Rogers on the spot. However, that might not address deeper problems within the bank's culture. A memory washed over him, a conversation he'd had with a mentor at Harvard Business School, who'd once said, "When you're in power, the biggest mistake is to assume that everyone automatically follows your vision. You have to keep your hands in the soil regularly, or the garden will grow wild." Marcus realized he had lost touch. He'd been too busy with big-picture decisions and philanthropic galas, trusting that his teams were upholding the bank's principles. Perhaps that trust had been misplaced. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to an internal number for Alicia Moore, the bank's director of customer experience. She was a long-time colleague and someone he greatly respected. But before he could make the call, he paused. He remembered that he wanted to remain undercover for a little longer, to gather indisputable evidence of misconduct, preferably in a way that would prompt lasting reforms, not just a quick fix. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Instead, he took a moment to regroup. Inside that building, the staff believed him to be just another customer, one they could dismiss. Marcus resolved to face the challenges and see where they led. For the sake of every other customer who might be mistreated or profiled, he would continue playing the role of an ordinary man until the moment came for an unequivocal reveal of who he truly was. Re-entering the bank, Marcus noticed that the line at the teller station had grown. Among the anxious customers was a young black woman cradling a toddler. She wore a tired expression and kept casting worried glances at the clock. Marcus could sense her frustration as Deborah, the teller, methodically processed a complicated transaction for a man in a suit. From behind, Marcus heard a voice quietly say, "This line is always too long at lunchtime, and they never have enough tellers." He turned to see a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair and a warm, empathetic face. He wore a company polo with the name tag, Jerome, personal banker. Intrigued, Marcus offered a polite nod. "Yeah, I noticed," Marcus replied softly. "Does it normally take this long to do simple withdrawals?" Jerome sighed, glancing around to ensure no one overheard. "Lately, yes. We had staff cutbacks a few months ago, and management hasn't stepped in to provide relief. Makes it tough for customers and for us." A wave of familiarity struck Marcus. He recalled a memo from the head of operations recommending resource optimization. He had never intended for that to translate into overworked staff or poor customer experiences. But apparently, Calvin Rogers had taken the directive to extremes, leaving the branch understaffed and ill-prepared. "You work here, right?" Marcus asked gently. "Why don't you jump in and help them out behind the counter?" Jerome gave a rueful smile. "I wish I could, but Calvin insists that personal bankers focus solely on new accounts and cross-sales. We have a teller for a reason, he always says." He lowered his voice. "Honestly, he's more interested in meeting monthly quotas than actually serving customers. Don't let him catch me chatting with you for too long. He'll think I'm slacking." Marcus nodded, feeling a sense of camaraderie with this empathetic employee. "Well, I appreciate you giving me a little background. I had a run-in with Mr. Rogers myself." Jerome's eyebrows rose. "I saw you come out of his office. I'm guessing it didn't go well." Marcus shook his head. "He refused to let me withdraw my own money, claimed there's a special note on my account requiring additional verification." A flicker of apology flashed across Jerome's face. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that. Honestly, I've seen him do that to other customers too, especially if they don't look a certain way, or if he thinks they're suspicious for any reason." Leaning in, he added, "He's turned away older folks, single mums, and even once threatened to call the police on a man who just wanted to deposit cash." As the line inched forward, Marcus felt a surge of determination. Meeting Jerome's gaze, he whispered, "Thank you for telling me this." It means a lot. Jerome only nodded, stepping away as the manager's door opened again. A fleeting thought crossed Marcus's mind. Not everyone here is part of the problem. There were good people, like Jerome, trapped under poor leadership. It fueled Marcus's resolve to see this through, both for the employees' sake and the customers the bank claimed to serve. Rather than leaving immediately, Marcus decided to linger in the branch to observe more interactions. He settled onto one of the worn chairs in the waiting area, pretending to fill out a deposit slip, but truly watching the bank's dynamics in action. A middle-aged couple approached Deborah's station. Their hushed conversation carried an air of anxiety, and Marcus quickly realized they were trying to secure a loan extension or negotiate a late mortgage payment. Deborah's tone was clipped and impatient. She typed furiously on her computer, then shook her head. "We can't help you," she said loudly. The couple exchanged desperate looks, but Deborah offered no empathy, no alternative solutions, just a flat refusal. The couple walked away, shoulders hunched. Marcus's stomach churned. Majesty Bank prided itself on working with customers to find solutions, especially for mortgage or loan hardships. Yet here, that principle seemed to have been replaced by a cold, transactional approach. A moment later, the young mother, Marcus, had noticed earlier reached the teller. Her toddler was restless, fussing in her arms. She explained she needed to withdraw money to pay rent, but for whatever reason, her debit card had been flagged. Deborah asked for ID, then demanded another form of identification, then launched into a series of pointed questions about the source of her funds. The mother's voice shook with embarrassment, and the baby began to cry. Instead of sympathy, Deborah wore an exasperated scowl. Marcus couldn't stay silent. Rising from his chair, he approached them gently. "Monsieur A.M., is everything all right?" he asked, hoping to give her moral support. Deborah gave him a severe glare. "Sir, one needs you to step away," Deborah said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "This is a private transaction." "I understand," Marcus replied calmly. "But if I could lend any help," Deborah cut him off, clearly enjoying the authority. "Unless you're a relative or her financial advisor, you shouldn't be involved." She turned back to the young woman, who now seemed on the verge of tears. Marcus stepped back, swallowing his anger. The teller's manner was borderline cruel. If this was how customers in need were treated, Majesty Bank's vaunted reputation was in jeopardy. He felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: shame for letting his leadership grow distant, frustration at the staff's behavior, and fierce determination to fix this systemic problem. Across the lobby, the branch manager's door opened once again, and Calvin Rogers stepped out, scanning the room like a hawk. Marcus wondered if Calvin was aware of every rude exchange, or if he actually endorsed such hostility. One thing was clear: the culture here was toxic, and from all appearances, it started at the top. Just as Marcus retreated to his seat, the door at the far corner of the lobby, labeled "Employees Only," swung open. A slim, bespectacled woman carrying a stack of files stepped out, heading toward Calvin Rogers's office. She paused when she spotted Marcus, her brow furrowing. It was a fleeting moment, but something in her expression hinted at recognition. Unsure whether she'd identified him, Marcus forced a nonchalant look, pretending to check his phone. Calvin beckoned her inside, and the door closed behind them. Marcus felt a spark of curiosity. Perhaps she was an auditor or a regional overseer. Then again, she didn't look like a typical district manager. Majesty Bank's district leaders usually wore name tags and business suits. This woman was dressed more casually. Could she be from another department? Minutes ticked by. Marcus tried to focus on the next steps. Should he blow his cover now or gather more evidence? A small part of him worried about the chaos that might ensue if he exposed himself too soon. He recalled stories of employees rallying to hide misconduct as soon as they discovered the boss was watching. Eventually, the office door cracked open and the woman slipped out, She glanced at Marcus one more time before heading back to the staff area. Just then, a phone on the manager's desk started ringing. Through the glass, Marcus saw Calvin pick it up, frown, and then leave the room. This was the moment. Marcus sensed an opportunity to glean more information. Rising quietly, he crossed the lobby, careful not to attract attention. He slipped toward the open door of the manager's office, the hustle of customers and staff providing him cover. Heart pounding, he peered inside. Calvin's computer screen was locked, displaying the Majesty Bank logo. A thick stack of files lay on the desk, various forms, memos, and a roster of employees. One document caught his eye, account flagging procedures. He skimmed the bullet points, high-risk clients, discretionary holds, and an ominous clause that read, "Branch manager reserves the right to deny transactions if the client's credibility is uncertain." Marcus's pulse quickened. This policy seemed open to abuse. Moreover, scribbled in the margin was a note, "Implement to meet quarterly target. Evaluate frequent visitors from certain neighborhoods." The word "certain neighborhoods" ignited a spark of anger. Is this an unwritten instruction for profiling customers? He remembered reading the official bank guidelines, which clearly stated that any form of discrimination based on race or socio-economic status was strictly prohibited. Yet here, it appeared that Calvin had twisted internal guidelines to justify turning away people he deemed undesirable. The story got darker the more Marcus uncovered. Hearing footsteps approaching, Marcus slipped away from the door. He quickly moved toward the waiting area again, grabbing a pamphlet to feign interest. Calvin rounded the corner, stepping back into his office. For a fleeting moment, the manager's gaze swept over the lobby. He locked eyes with Marcus, just for a second, before returning to his seat. Marcus exhaled slowly. He'd seen enough to confirm that something was deeply wrong here, and he intended to fix it. The only question was how far the corruption extended and how to dismantle it for good. Satisfied that he'd gathered enough observations for one day, Marcus planned to leave. He'd come back soon, perhaps with a strategy to confront Calvin Rogers directly. Yet destiny intervened. As he approached the glass doors, a tall, impeccably dressed man in his early 50s stepped inside. The man froze, staring wide-eyed at Marcus. "Marcus Hamilton?" the newcomer blurted out, though he quickly caught himself. Excuse me, sir, do I know you from somewhere?" Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the man as Gregory Wilcox, an old acquaintance from a philanthropic event. Gregory had never seen him in casual clothes before, but apparently the resemblance was strong enough to spark suspicion. Marcus forced a polite smile, hoping to downplay the significance of their meeting. "You might have me mistaken for someone else." Gregory's eyes flicked uncertainly between Marcus's face and the rest of the bank. "Could be," he said, sounding unconvinced. "Anyway, I'm here for an appointment with the manager. Have a good day." Marcus nodded and slipped out the door. Outside, the sting of cold air greeted him once more. He exhaled, heart pounding. This was a close call. If Gregory realized that the CEO was wandering around incognito, the entire branch might quickly shift into pleasing the boss mode, ruining Marcus's investigation. For now, it seemed Gregory was unsure. But what if he mentioned it offhand to Calvin Rogers or someone else? Marcus's cover might soon be blown. Still, he refused to regret his decision to come undercover. He now had concrete examples of the bank's poor customer service and a possible bias in the account flagging procedure. The next move required subtlety, though. If he marched in with an army of attorneys and compliance officers, employees might close ranks and hide evidence. Instead, Marcus needed the honest cooperation of those like Jerome, the conscientious personal banker, to root out the systematic mistreatment. Pulling out his phone, Marcus decided to send an inconspicuous message to Alicia Moore, need to meet regarding the Madison Street branch. sensitive issues, off-site, confidential. She was known for her integrity, and if anyone could help orchestrate a fair internal probe, it would be her. Tucking his phone away, Marcus gazed once more at the facade of Majesty Bank. The words, "your trusted partner," shone in the winter sunlight, an ironic testament to how far the branch's operations had strayed from their intended mission. "I'm not giving up on this place," Marcus muttered to himself, turning to walk toward the bus stop. It was a promise to himself, to every underserved customer, and to the vision that had compelled him to become the CEO in the first place. Later that evening, Marcus hosted Alicia Moore in his private study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and lit by a single warm lamp. The flicker of a fireplace danced across the leather armchairs, but the ambience felt anything but serene. Alicia, a poised woman in her early 40s with a sharp intellect, listened intently as Marcus recounted every detail of his undercover experience. "I was refused a withdrawal from my own account," Marcus explained, leaning forward, voice taut with disbelief. The branch manager, Calvin Rogers, claimed there was a special note requiring extra security checks. "But from what I saw, it's purely discretionary. He's turning away people he deems risky, often those who are older, single parents, or who don't look wealthy." Elisha frowned, carefully absorbing each word. "That's a huge deviation from our official policy. We have systems in place to protect against fraud, but this is something entirely different." "It sounds like outright discrimination." Marcus gave a solemn nod. "It is. And if he's doing this with the backing of some unscrupulous superiors, or if they're simply looking the other way, Majesty Bank stands on dangerous ground. Lawsuits, regulatory fines, damage to our reputation." Alicia set down her teacup, eyes dark with concern. "How do you want to proceed? We can't just barge in tomorrow and fire everyone. We need evidence, documentation, and we need to handle this carefully to avoid tipping them off." Marcus agreed. "Exactly. I'm thinking of a multi-step plan. First, we'll conduct a secret audit. We can send in mystery shoppers from different backgrounds, young, old, well-dressed, casually dressed, to see if there's a pattern in how they're treated. Second, we gather internal data, logs of flagged accounts, recordings of staff protocols, and so on." Elisha nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. "I know a couple of compliance officers we can trust implicitly. They'll help us keep this low-key. We'll gather enough hard facts to confront Calvin Rogers and whoever else might be complicit. And once we have that evidence," Marcus continued, "we'll make a decisive move. Not only will we clean house at the Madison Street branch, but we'll also reevaluate training across all our locations. We'll remind everyone of our core values and show zero tolerance for discrimination." Elisha stood, smoothing the crease in her blazer. "I'll start making calls. We need to handle this swiftly. The longer we wait, the more customers could be harmed." Marcus escorted her to the door. Before she left, Elisha paused. "I just want to say, I'm proud you're taking this stand, Marcus. A lot of CEOs would look the other way or try to hush it up, not you." He offered a tight smile. "I won't let my people suffer. I've been that young man, or that struggling parent, turned away from opportunity because of ignorance or bias. Not anymore. Not under my watch." As Elisha disappeared into the night, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about rectifying a single branch's behavior. It was about honoring the promise he made to himself and his community years ago to create a bank that truly served every person who walked through its doors. Over the following week, Elisha quietly orchestrated a team of mystery shoppers to visit the Madison Street branch. Their backgrounds varied dramatically. There was Lila, a retired teacher who dressed modestly and carried a small handbag. Tyrone, a construction worker in his late 20s, wearing dusty boots and a worn jacket. Maria, a well-off businesswoman in designer attire. And Edward, a middle-aged accountant with a polished demeanor. Each had a scripted banking need like opening a small savings account or inquiring about a personal loan, and each recorded their experiences with hidden microphones or smartphone apps. The results were disturbing. Lila and Tyrone reported extended questioning, suspicious looks, and outright denials of basic services. Tyrone was asked if he had a criminal record after he requested to withdraw a few $100s in cash from a check. Lila was told to come back another time because her ID didn't look right, even though it was perfectly valid. Maria, on the other hand, was treated with courtesy, offered coffee, and guided into Calvin Rogers's office to discuss premium account options. Edward also received fairly efficient service, though less fawning than Maria's experience. In each negative case, the path always led back to the same script: we have a special note on your account, or we need more verification. Intriguingly, sometimes the teller or Rogers himself mentioned a company policy that neither mystery shopper recognized from official Majesty Bank documents. Alicia compiled all the recordings, transcripts, and logs into a confidential report. Late on a Thursday evening, she emailed the report to Marcus with a subject line: critical evidence, must read. Marcus stayed up until midnight, sifting through every detail. The pattern was undeniable. If you looked poor, older, or simply not in line with the manager's biased perception, you faced immediate hurdles. Meanwhile, the well-dressed or obviously affluent were ushered along seamlessly. Marcus felt a mix of outrage and sorrow. This was exactly the type of discrimination he'd fought against his entire career. And yet it was happening under his watch. Majesty Bank was complicit, at least on the local level. How far does this go? He wondered, clenching his jaw. Are there more branches with managers like Rogers who twist policy for their own prejudices? With the evidence in hand, the next step was clear. An internal confrontation had to happen swiftly and decisively. But to ensure lasting change, Marcus wanted to make a statement that would reverberate throughout the organization, that this kind of behavior was unacceptable and would not be tolerated, no matter who was involved. Striking the right balance, being firm yet constructive, would be tricky, but Marcus had no illusions. Any leniency toward Rogers and his like-minded staff would signal to everyone else that the rules didn't really matter. He refused to let that stand. On a brisk Monday morning, Marcus and Alicia arrived at the Madison Street branch unannounced. This time, Marcus wasn't undercover. He wore a crisp charcoal suit, a navy tie, and the quiet authority of a man who wasn't there to negotiate. Alicia, equally poised in a tailored skirt suit, carried a portfolio of evidence. A hush fell over the branch as they stepped inside. Deborah the teller seemed stunned, her eyes wide. Jerome, the personal banker, gave a small, almost relieved smile upon seeing them. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus said, projecting warmth without losing seriousness. "I'm Marcus Hamilton, CEO of Majesty Bank. My colleague, Alicia Moore, leads our customer experience division. We're here to speak with branch manager Calvin Rogers." The tension in the air was palpable as Deborah directed them to the manager's office. Through the glass door, Calvin looked up from his desk, eyes widening. He hastily stood, adjusting his tie before opening the door. "Mr. Hamilton, this is." "Unexpected," Calvin managed, attempting a polite smile. "Yes, it is," Marcus replied, stepping inside. "But it's necessary. May we?" He gestured for Alicia to close the office door behind them. Calvin offered them seats, and he took his behind the desk, trying to maintain composure. The silence stretched for a moment before Marcus spoke again. "I've come across some disturbing information regarding how customers are being treated here." Marcus began. We need to discuss this immediately. Calvin's face betrayed a flicker of panic before he forced an unconvincing grin. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. This branch is run according to bank policies. Our staff is diligent about security and preventing fraud. Elisha opened her portfolio, revealing a neatly compiled stack of transcripts and documents. We've conducted an internal audit, including mystery shopper visits. The evidence shows a pattern of discriminatory behavior, particularly against customers you perceive as less affluent or from certain backgrounds. This includes unjust refusals to withdraw funds, excessive demands for additional ID, and even hostile interactions. Calvin paled slightly. There must be some mistake. We only follow the protocol to verify suspicious transactions. Marcus locked eyes with him. And who decides what's suspicious? Because it appears your decisions target people based on race, age, or economic status. That is not how Majesty Bank operates. Our official policy requires fair, courteous treatment for every client. For a moment, Calvin tried to stammer a defense, but no coherent words came out. He shifted in his seat, sweat beading at his temple. The weight of the evidence was undeniable. Elisha pressed on. We have recordings of staff telling a retired teacher to come back another time after refusing her valid ID. We have a single mother who was humiliated at the teller window while trying to withdraw rent money. We have a construction worker who was asked if he had a criminal record simply because he wasn't dressed in a business suit. How do you explain these incidents? Calvin's gaze darted between Marcus and Elisha. Unable to form a convincing lie, he opted for a feeble claim of ignorance. One, didn't know they were being treated that way. Maybe my team interpreted policy too strictly. Marcus frowned. The time for half-truths was over. We're here for a full accounting, Mr. Rogers. And depending on what we find, the consequences may be severe for you and anyone else who endorsed these tactics. Marcus and Elisha summoned the branch staff to the small conference room at the back of the bank. Deborah, Jerome, 2 other tellers, and a customer service representative filed in with a mix of apprehension and relief. Calvin Rogers hovered near the door, looking more and more like a man cornered. All right, Elisha said, her voice projecting both authority and understanding. We're here to address serious concerns about how customers have been treated. We want each of you to share your perspective. Don't worry about retaliation. This is a safe space. Mr. Hamilton and I will ensure your honesty is protected. For a moment, no one spoke, each employee glancing at Calvin to gauge his reaction. Then Jerome cleared his throat. I'll go first. I've worked here for 2 years, and at first, everything was fine. But about 6 months ago, Mr. Rogers started implementing these extra verification rules. He told us it was to fight fraud, but it felt like we were scrutinizing certain people more than others. Deborah looked uneasy, casting a sidelong glance at her manager. I was just following directions. Mr. Rogers said if someone looks suspicious or can't prove stable employment, we should place a hold on their account or deny their transaction. I didn't want to lose my job. Elisha took notes, nodding patiently. When you say someone looks suspicious, what criteria were you given? Deborah hesitated, then whispered, he told us to be wary of people wearing dirty clothes, or if they appear to be from the lower income neighborhoods. You know, that side of town. Her voice trembled with shame. I'm sorry, but I needed this job, and I didn't think I had a choice. Jerome jumped in. It's been tearing me up. I've seen good people denied basic banking services, but every time I brought up my concerns, Rogers threatened to write me up. He said I wasn't too soft, and that I'd be replaced if I didn't follow orders. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room, other staff members nodding in agreement. Calvin Rogers, standing at the back with arms crossed, scowled. I'm the branch manager. It's my responsibility to keep this bank profitable. Some folks come in trying to commit fraud or pass bad checks. You want me to just let that slide? We'd lose millions. Marcus stood, voice firm but calm. There's a huge difference between legitimate security measures and indiscriminately targeting people based on prejudice. We have robust systems to flag fraudulent checks, none of which involve judging someone's clothes or supposed neighborhood. Our mission as a community-focused bank is to serve everyone respectfully. Calvin tried to respond, but Marcus silenced him with a raised hand. We'll have more questions for you in a moment. For now, we're listening to your team. The staff, emboldened by Marcus's presence, continued sharing examples. A teller recounted how Rogers specifically told them to make it tough for older black customers who came in with large checks. Another recalled Rogers bragging about how his methods kept the riffraff out. The more they spoke, the deeper the rot appeared. Marcus listened gravely, a stone forming in his stomach. This was not just a minor oversight, it was a systemic abuse of power by a manager who twisted policy to fit his prejudices. The reckoning had arrived, and it would be swift. With the employees' testimonies echoing in the conference room, Marcus turned to Calvin Rogers. The manager's expression shifted from defiance to desperation, as if realizing the noose was tightening. Outside the glass walls, customers waited in the lobby, oblivious to the drama unfolding behind closed doors. "Mr. Rogers," Marcus began, "we've gathered substantial evidence that you instructed your staff to discriminate against specific demographics. This is not only against Majesty Bank's policy, it's against the law. Now is your chance to offer any final words or explanations." Calvin stared at the floor, beads of sweat forming on his brow. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. "I did what I thought was best for the bank. We're under a lot of pressure to meet quotas, keep defaults low, and prevent fraud. The neighborhoods around here, they're full of crime, scams. I just wanted to protect the branch." "By profiling and denying legitimate customers?" Elisha interjected, her tone sharp. "That's not protection, it's bigotry. Our data shows no spike in fraud that would justify these measures. You were making assumptions." Jerome and Deborah exchanged uneasy glances, but neither spoke. Marcus let Calvin's words hang in the air, then responded, "We have automated fraud detection systems, advanced verification processes, and specific guidelines from corporate. None of those guidelines mention turning away someone because they're wearing a hoodie or appear to be poor. You exceeded your authority in the worst way." Calvin's eyes darted around, searching for sympathy, but found none. Finally, he slumped in his seat. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, though it was unclear if he regretted the actions or simply being caught. Marcus sighed. The anger he'd felt earlier now laced with a somber resignation. "Your employment at Majesty Bank is hereby terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you off the premises. I'll also be recommending that we pursue legal review of your actions to determine if further action is warranted." Calvin's mouth opened in protest, but no words came out. Two security officers, who had been discreetly called to the conference room, stepped forward. The staff watched in silent awe as their manager was led away. After Calvin left, Marcus turned back to the employees. "This branch needs new leadership and a fresh start. Until we appoint a new manager, Alicia and I will oversee daily operations. We'll also offer everyone additional training on our core values and non-discrimination policies." Jerome raised a tentative hand. "Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. We appreciate this chance to rebuild trust with our customers." Marcus's gaze swept across the room, settling on each face. "Remember why we work at a community bank: to uplift people, not shut them out. Let's make sure our neighbors, friends, and families feel welcome here. That's the real mission of Majesty Bank." Outside, curious customers peered in, uncertain of the commotion. But for the staff, a glimmer of relief and hope began to take root. Hard karma had arrived for Calvin Rogers, and in its wake, the possibility of a better, more just future emerged. Over the next several days, the Madison Street branch underwent a transformation. Marcus insisted on being there each morning when the doors opened, ready to greet customers. Alicia oversaw a crash course in inclusive customer service, training staff on everything from greeting people warmly to offering solutions instead of rejections. Jerome stepped up, taking on additional responsibilities in the absence of an official manager. He quickly demonstrated a knack for empathizing with clients, ensuring their needs were met efficiently. Deborah, visibly shaken by the fallout, sought guidance from Elisha and Marcus on how to rebuild her confidence. "I feel terrible," she confessed in a private conversation with Marcus. "I let myself get bullied into hurting people. How can they ever trust me again?" Marcus offered a reassuring smile. Acknowledging the mistake is the first step. Show genuine remorse and work hard to improve. Customers can sense sincerity. Over time, you'll earn their trust. News of Calvin Rogers's termination spread throughout Majesty Bank's network. At first, some staff at other branches were anxious, worried that corporate might begin a wholesale crackdown. But once Marcus clarified the situation in an internal memo, explaining the bank's unwavering stance against discrimination, many employees expressed relief. They too had grown wary of management styles that prioritized metrics over human dignity. An unexpected outcome was an uptick in customers returning to the Madison Street branch. Word got around in the local community that the bank's CEO had personally intervened to ensure fair treatment. A local reporter from the Chicago Tribune picked up the story, initially writing a piece titled "Majesty Bank CEO Cleans House After Discriminatory Practices Revealed." Yet as more details emerged, the narrative shifted toward how the bank was now actively working to serve the diverse community. Marcus read the article with a humble sense of pride, but also caution. "One branch is a start," he told Elisha, "but we need to ensure this never happens again at any of our locations. Let's expand our internal audits, update our training programs, and set up an anonymous hotline for employees to report unethical behavior." Elisha agreed wholeheartedly. "We'll also track metrics on customer satisfaction, especially among historically underserved communities. And we can partner with local nonprofits to hold financial literacy workshops." Thus, the tragedy at Madison Street became a catalyst for broader reforms. What began as a humiliating denial of Marcus's right to withdraw his own money had grown into a corporate-wide reckoning with prejudice. On a personal level, Marcus felt renewed determination to stay connected to the daily operations of Majesty Bank. He vowed never again to let misguided managers create a culture of suspicion and fear under the guise of security. A month after the dramatic confrontation, the Madison Street branch buzzed with a new energy. The once chilly atmosphere had warmed as staff members greeted each customer with welcoming smiles. The previously empty walls now displayed photos of local community events, food drives, literacy programs, and small business grant winners. Marcus insisted on featuring success stories of everyday people, reminding everyone that Majesty Bank existed to support the community. Jerome, now interim branch manager, led by example. He ensured that each teller took time to ask customers about their day, genuinely listening to concerns. During staff meetings, they discussed not only sales targets, but also ways to better serve people from all walks of life. Elisha visited frequently, coaching the team on everything from conflict resolution to advanced compliance policies. Mia, the single mother, once reduced to tears at the teller window, returned to the branch. This time, Deborah greeted her kindly, processed her transaction with ease, and even apologized for the past. Though initially hesitant, Mia recognized the sincerity and left with a hopeful smile. Lila, the retired teacher who had been turned away, came in to open a savings account for her grandchildren's education fund. Jerome personally helped her set it up. Outside, in the crisp Chicago winter, a small crowd had gathered by the bank's entrance for a community event. Marcus stood at a podium alongside local leaders. A black, gold, and green banner reading Majesty Bank, renewing our commitment, hung proudly above them. Cameras flashed as local news reporters covered the story. Marcus addressed the crowd. "When I first helped shape the direction of Majesty Bank, I dreamed of a place where everyone felt valued, regardless of background or status. We lost our way. But today, we're here to reclaim our purpose, standing alongside this community. We were always meant to serve." A wave of applause and cheers rose from attendees. The once tainted branch was now a symbol of renewal, proof that mistakes could be rectified if leaders took responsibility. Children laughed as volunteers handed out hot cocoa, while seniors chatted with staff about new financial literacy classes the bank planned to offer. In that joyful moment, Marcus felt the weight of his undercover ordeal lift. The memory of being denied his own withdrawal, the shock of prejudice in his own institution, all of it had paved the way for meaningful change. Hard karma had indeed hit back at those who perpetuated injustice. Yet from that reckoning sprang a stronger bond between the bank and the people it served. From a single denied withdrawal rose a powerful story of accountability, resilience, and renewal. Marcus Hamilton's undercover encounter revealed deep-rooted discrimination within his own bank, yet it also uncovered dedicated staff willing to stand for what's right. By confronting and removing the toxic leadership at the Madison Street branch, Majesty Bank not only restored trust, but also reignited its founding mission to empower every member of the community, no matter their background. If this dramatic journey inspired you, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that shine a light on real-life lessons about justice, courage, and the power of people united. Your support keeps these vital conversations going, helping us explore how everyday heroes can transform lives and entire institutions when they choose to stand against injustice. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more compelling tales.